The people who have lived in a rough neighborhood, places with gang violence and stuff. What challenges did you face on a day-to-day basis? What experiences have stayed with you? Didn't live in one of those areas, but frequently worked in them. I worked for a government program which provided certain home improvements at no cost to those income qualified: windows, doors, insulation, roofs. Because of the nature of the program, I often worked in bad areas, and a lot of Section 8 projects. We have a generator on the back of our truck that we use daily. The power supply in most of these run-down homes wasn't enough to support our tools. As you can imagine, the generator is pretty loud. A lot of the time, you'd hear it sputter and kick on and off. This usually meant some debris dirt got into the fuel filter. No problem. Clean it out and start it back up again. One morning, we fire up the generator and get to work. While I'm 12 feet up on a ladder, installing a bathroom fan vent, I hear the generator start to slowly quiet down. I roll my eyes because I know I'll have to get down, go out front to the truck and clean the filter. But since at that particular moment I wasn't using a tool, just a caulk gun, I figure fuck it, I'll do it when I'm done here. But then the generator makes a fainter noise. And gets fainter and fainter. I knew something was up. I get down from the ladder and go out front. About 5 houses away on the sidewalk are 2 gentlemen, trying their best to run away with our generator while it was still on. The thing weighs about 300 pounds, and it awkward as fuck to carry, even with 2 people. The strain and back crippling run they were doing was impressive. I really couldn't even be mad. I caught up with them. Tried to stop them. One guy had a screwdriver he was threatening me with. I backed off and called the cops. They caught up with them a block later. They weren't hard to find. They ended up getting charged with robbery and both went to the hospital. They both had severe burns on their arms and legs from the exhaust on the machine rubbing up against them as they made their great escape. From there on out the machine was chained to the truck. Lots of stuff that has been mentioned already. I will add, having to walk several blocks to an area where delivery drivers, like pizza, would meet you because they would not go further into your neighborhood. Same with cabs, Ubers. Knowing who belongs there is a big one. You know who the regular dealers are, etc. If you see a new person around, that raises suspicion because they could be trouble. Keeping the possessions you really cared about locked up, not in car, in home, because break-ins happen. I personally kept my Poe's car unlocked because I could not afford to replace broken window. Nothing in it was worth anything and it never has gotten stolen. Before I had a car, getting groceries was hard. Like another person said, grocery stores were not close by, just overpriced ghetto marts, corner stores. Even catching a bus was hard because there was less service in my area than in other parts of the city. Violence was present, but not something that bothered me, maybe I was used to it. I have had an armed escort home several times when I found myself in the middle of a gang dispute. Each time a few fellows who knew I lived near called a truce of sorts and would walk me home. Not that I was particularly special, I think they did that to others who happened to be out late. Grew up in a rough area of North Las Vegas. One of our apartment neighbors was this guy that ran with a Mexican gang and sold drugs. One day my brother and I are playing in front of our door when we see about 3 biker dudes roll up. They knock on the door and politely ask our neighbor's wife if her husband was home. She says yes, and he comes to the door. Within seconds they yank him from his doorstep and proceed to beat him up with pipes they pulled out of seemingly nowhere. He's screaming, pleading for help, where in steps neighbor number 2. This guy was about as hardcore gangbanger as you can get. He screams down and says he's coming, at which time the bikers proceed to run out towards the parking lot. They haven't reached the lot when shots ring out, boom, boom, boom. Glass shatters and you can't hear bullets hitting steel. Neighbor number 2 legit tried to murder these dudes in front of us. By now my mom is screaming, rounding us up to come inside. We go upstairs to ride out the police questioning that will follow. The cops show up and knock, but my mom refuses to open the door. We never talk to police. That is how you survive in those places. If it doesn't involve you, you saw nothing. Even if it did, you still didn't see anything. Very memorable part of my childhood. Couple years ago I was leaving my house for uni when I heard a huge bashing sound coming from my neighbor's house, who I didn't know well, but had always seen around and chatted to occasionally. I lived with my bro, and it was a rough neighborhood with lots of break-ins and fights, so I always tried to keep my head down and be polite. Anyway, I had a look and saw a guy, who later turned out to be a plainclothes policeman, with a battering ram breaking into the house. Police then swarmed the house and removed about 4 women, who looked like they had been abused, a whole bunch of dudes, and a shit ton of drugs and weapons. Turns out they were running a brothel and had been monitored by police for months. I knew something dodgy was going on because guys would come and go in the middle of the night and could always smell weed, but I had no idea it was that serious. Turns out they were keeping the women hooked on drugs and threatened them if they ever leaves the house. Scary stuff. Was always polite to them and kept my head down whenever possible. This was in the UK, but I guess the same thing would work anywhere else. I grew up with drive-by shootings and gang activity in general. I feel like a lot of important childhood memories are interlaced with weird neighborhood shit. The day we got our first puppy, my friend across the street pulled a gun on his dad. When the cops showed up, he ran down the street and turned the gun on himself. Everyone was fine that day. But I'll never forget having a new puppy and not being able to take it to the bathroom because we could get shot. I also learned to treat everyone with respect. People were stabbed to death next door, drive-bys hit the house 2 doors down. No one ever shot us though. People looked out for us. In junior high I was jazzed home often by men yelling that they'd pay me for my services. In high school my family worked nights and I was home alone. At this point my friend across the street just got out of prison and was pissed I was home alone. He called in a favor with the Hells Angels and they patrolled my street at night. My mom said oftentimes she'd come home just as 2 motorists would drive away. They protected me for a few years. How normal it seemed until I was out from under that. You grow up knowing how to stay off the radar and not bother the wrong people. You see wild, crazy, scary things on the regular and learn to keep your mouth shut and pretend you didn't. You're just a kid like any other kid, but you have to be preternaturally aware of the relationships and hierarchies and happenings around you all the time to make sure you don't end up in the wrong place at the wrong time. For example, there was a guy who let his big mean dogs, I don't remember the breed, run loose in the neighborhood, but the dogs respected boundaries in terms of how close you could get to their house before you got your throat torn out. Stay far enough aware and they just sat watching you with the occasional menacing growl. I spent the year we lived there thinking it was perfectly normal that I couldn't walk home from school on that one side of the street on penalty of death. It's just what happens. It's just your normal. Confidence gets you a long way. When I was young we lived in the ghetto in an apartment next door to my aunt and uncle. The complex had a picnic table all the kids would play on. One day 4 gang members took the table across the street and put it outside their complex and would hang out on it. My dad and uncle got together, talked it over for a bit, then walked over there. There was a brief exchange, the only thing I remember is watching my dad make the get up motion with his thumb. The 4 guys got up and my dad and uncle brought the table back. Stand for what's yours or people will take it. Show confidence or people will see weakness. Didn't make eye contact with anyone walking down the street, especially when there's a crazy homeless person. Went straight home after school, etc. I never wore anything flashy and mostly never wore makeup to look as unattractive as possible to not get unwanted attention, same goes for my clothing style. Basically just try to be invisible. Going for a run in my old neighborhood was impossible. Hated going to the store walking for fear of getting chased by a dog. Thankfully I've since moved. I lived near the 4 corners of death. The intersection consisted of a food for less the trolley station, an empty lot and Popeyes. The trolley station was the most ample place for violent attacks, rape and kidnapping. I would miss each event by 5 minutes or by the pickup of the trolley before or after. I was followed multiple times. Missed a kidnapping moments after I left the station. I remember my dad calling me at work to make sure it wasn't me. Then hanging up and carrying on. The girl died. There was a gang out for blood. She was the wrong girl on top of that. Crowds would develop sometimes and you would know to leave. Latino gangs would fight black gangs or the neighborhood high schools would meet and fight over small things. Watching guys, flash guns, blades, knives. Ultimately killing someone and the station would be open the next day. Sacrifice was normal and God was never there in the ghetto to protect you. I got away by chance. I know it's been said a few times, but absolutely keep your head down and be polite as can be to your neighbors. Lots of the tougher dudes I warmed up to lived with their elders, but if not it was their single parent. Man, be nice to them, help them out, and don't ask BS questions or get too friendly with the troublemaker in the home. They see you're respecting their elder, that's huge. You don't need to be all chummy with them other than to show them simple respect too. Being the only white kid in the entire surrounding area in Pomona. My head was always on a swivel. My group of friends weren't the best in other situations, but were damn good for the environment I was in. Got into daily scrap fights off campus with other kids who didn't really like gringos. Saw a friend's uncle get shot to death in a drive-by after he was released from prison early. He was dead before his body hit the ground. The biggest thing that has stayed with me is the ability to spot a shitbag from a mile away. My dad stayed in a hotel overnight once on his way to his parents' house for Thanksgiving. In the morning he stopped to get gas, and when he got out got jumped by 5 guys who misread the back of his jacket and thought he was a part of some Apazing gang. Then the gas station attendant, who was a 6-something black guy with a baseball bat, came out and scared them off by hitting the bat on the ground. Dad ended up with his jaw shattered and had it wired shut throughout Thanksgiving and Christmas. My story is somewhat funny. I used to live in the poor cheap prostitute area of Montreal. One day, my mom came to pick me up. I was wearing Bermuda shorts with an oversized t-shirt that was stained, was going to help her paint her living room. I'm waiting on the street corner and a car pulls up that looks like my mom's. I bend down to look at the driver to make sure it's my mom before I hop in. It's her, so I get in the car. Next thing I know, some girls start running towards us, screaming that I stole her client and that her daddy will come for me. I told my mom to GTFO and I moved shortly after.